I'm excited to be able to introduce to you Ryan Mullins. Dr. Ryan Mullins has held research and teaching fellowships at the University of Notre Dame, the University of Cambridge, the University of St. Andrews, the University of Edinburgh, and the University of Helsinki. He is currently a lecturer at the University of Lucerne and is a visiting professor of philosophy and religion for the Palm Beach Atlantic University's MA in Philosophy of Religion program. He also has a docent of dogmatics from the University of Helsinki. He received a BS from Point University, an MA in philosophy from Trinity International University, and a PhD in philosophical theology from the University of St. Andrews. And he also has received a doctorate of education from the University of Helsinki. Ryan has published over 50 essays on various topics in philosophical theology related to models of God, philosophy of time, personal identity, the problem of evil, disability theology, the Trinity, and the Incarnation. He has published 5 books: Eternal in Love, a little book about a big God by Cascade, From Divine Time Maker to Divine Watchmaker, The End of the Timeless God from Oxford, God and Emotion at Cambridge, Dios las Escrituras. He is also the co-editor for the Cascade series. He is a member of different research groups across the UK and Europe, such as the Society for the Philosophy of Time and Emotion and Religion. He is a regularly invited speaker on different YouTube channels and podcasts. He even hosts his own podcast called The Reluctant Theologian, which is excellent, by the way. When not engaging in philosophical theology, he is often found at a metal show. Please welcome Ryan Mullins, Dr. Ryan Mullins.
Okay, good. So you might have noticed this is not the comedy show from last year. There's no goth makeup. Unfortunately, there's no heavy metal playing, unfortunately, but that's okay. This will be less funny, more boring. It's going to be terrible. You should probably leave now. But so we're going to be talking about one of my new books, because I've got 2 books that have come out recently. This one came out a couple months ago. This is the one we're talking about. And then my Divine Time Maker book came out yesterday. Which, yeah, I know. Yeah. So yeah. Thank you. What I want to thank Andrew for doing a lot of editing on this book, because this thing, I hate editing the books at the end. It's terrible. Getting all the footnotes and everything right, it's awful. But Andrew did this, so I want to thank him for that. And then this Time Maker book that came out yesterday, I'm really proud of this. It is the most thorough investigation of God's temporality and the most thorough investigation of different models of God in existence. That's not a humble brag. I'm just bragging. Now, so we're doing very cutting-edge stuff here at Palm Beach, and was it 2 years ago? Was that last time I did the intensive? Right. 2 years ago, we went through the manuscripts for the Time Maker book and then parts of this. So conversations that are happening here with the students, it's what makes these things really come together the way they have. So very thankful for all the students we got here. Anyway, let's get on with the show. It's enough incoherent rambling. Now let's have some hopefully coherent rambling. Okay, so this book here, Eternal in Love, what I was wanting to do is I wanted to offer a concise statement of what I think about God right now. Because, your beliefs change over time. Mine have as well. I don't have the same beliefs I did when I was a kid. We're going to talk a bit about that later. But what I think about God right now. And then I wanted to offer something more devotional than you normally get in your academic books. Because academic writing, you're not allowed to have a personality. They beat that out of you. And, you need to write like a phone book. Otherwise, you're not doing real objective stuff. And then, this publisher, they let me be way more sarcastic than I'm ever allowed to be. So, this I got some cool stuff in here. So I want to talk to you about some of the ideas. So here's one of the major themes. So if you want to be close to someone, if you want to be in a close personal relationship with someone, you need to know what that person is like. You need to have some kind of grasp on their character. You need to know what this person cares about. What is this person's goals? What are their projects that they're working on? And if you want to be close to someone, you need to be able to share in those cares and concerns to some sort of extent. And you need to figure out how can you actually support their projects. That's how you develop a deep and meaningful personal relationship with someone. And so this is true in our relationships with one another, and I want to say the same thing is true about your relationship with God. If you want to be close to God, you need to have some kind of grasp on what is God like. What does God care about? What are God's goals and projects? And how do you support those projects? So that's the main theme of this book. So what I want to do today is I want to take you through some of these big ideas as they relate to God's goals and what God cares about. And so this is related to something called the general problem of creation and the particular problem of creation. And this is going to lead us to discuss some issues about evil and suffering in the world and why God's existence is just not painfully obvious all the time. Because here's the big question that really bothers me. So my wife and I were really bothered by this one question. Why are we living in a world like this? Out of all the possible universes that could exist, why this one? And so that's one of the big things I'm trying to work on. So let's get into this a little bit more deeply. So in this book, I look at something called the general problem of creation. And so here's the question with this. Why would God create anything at all? Not like why anything in particular, just like in general, why would God create? And so it's a very serious problem. It's a serious problem that hardly any Christian talks about anymore. But I've written several different papers on the topic. I talk about it in this little book, and then I'm planning on working on a much bigger book on all the different models of God that exist and how they handle these kinds of problems. So in the little book, I give an answer for why God might create anything at all. And I say that the reason is for God to create, the reason God would create is to bring about certain kinds of values or good things that would not exist otherwise. So there's lots of different kinds of good things that God might wish to bring about, such as beauty, complexity, and so on. And these are valuable things that would not exist if God did not create. And I think that gives God a reason to just create in general. But I want to focus on one particular value that serves as a partial explanation for why God would create. So one common suggestion from the world's religions is that God desires to enter into a relationship with conscious creatures. But Christianity specifies what that relationship is supposed to look like. So in the Gospel of John, what you see Jesus explain that God desires to enter into friendship with humanity. You see this throughout the Gospel of John. And so what I do is I call this God's most central purpose. So as I see it, when I try to go in detail in this book, is I'm trying to look more at like what exactly is this issue up here. So let's say that God's most central purpose for creating the universe is to enter into friendship with humanity. And so this raises a big question for us. What are the general features of a universe where friendship between God and humans is possible? So basically, if God wants friendship with humans, what kind of universe does he need to create? Because not any old universe is going to get the job done. Like it's going to have some very specific kind of features. So what I want to do is try to identify a few of these general features that need to be in the universe if God's going to satisfy that goal of entering into friendship with humanity. So let's give ourselves here. Not used to having paper, so I'm just going to just fumble this for a bit. Talk amongst yourself. No, I got it. Okay, so the first feature, friendship with God and the requirement of human freedom. So God has created humans with the goal of entering into a genuine friendship with them. So Brian Leftow, he offers some reflections on friendship with God and human freedom. So he starts exactly where I want to start, which is just noticing that God desires to be friends with humans. You see this throughout Scripture. Then what Leftow does is he asks, how can God bring this about? And so Leftow, he makes a very standard claim. Friendship requires freedom. It requires freedom. He says that most friendships begin with some kind of involuntary attraction. You just see someone, you're like, oh, that look interesting, But people choose whether or not to continue the relationship, and they turn that into a genuine friendship. So he says, friendship is a deliberately pursued project, for we seek our friends' company, seek to know them better, to further their interests, and to keep ourselves attractive to them. Further, we commit ourselves to our friends. Fair weather friends are not true friends. A true friend is someone you can count on. A true friend is committed to stand by us and help us in times of trouble, and will, if the time comes, choose to honor that commitment. So he puts a very big emphasis on freedom. And I want you to notice something here. So he goes on, he says, genuine commitment cannot be coerced, nor can the rest of friendship. We can be forced to act friendly, but we cannot be forced into a genuine friendship. And in fact, attempts to force us may make us cease to even like the person who's coercing us. If any of you have ever been in any really abusive relationships, you know that really in your gut. You cannot coerce this sort of stuff. It's going to be a good friendship. So if God's most central purpose in creating this universe is to enter into a genuine friendship with humans, then God cannot coerce that friendship. Because coercion breeds all manner of bad emotions and beliefs that lead to broken relationships. So for example, coercion can lead the coerced person to feel resentment, fear, hatred towards the person that's manipulating them. Any sort of positive emotions you might have, that's probably just brainwashing or Stockholm syndrome, something like that. It's not going to be a genuine friendship. And so according to Leftow, God's perfect love places certain constraints on how God can bring about a genuine friendship with humans. So he says, if God gave creatures natures which guaranteed that they would love, trust, and commit to God, this would be relevantly like brainwashing or coercion. Our response would ultimately come from God, not us. God would frustrate his goal of befriending us. So God can befriend us only by giving us natures which leave us free to reject this friendship. Because God imposes our natures on us, if God genuinely wants to be friends, he must impose natures on us which leave us free to reject his friendship. So when you think about this constraint of freedom, do we need freedom in order to have a genuine friendship with God? When you think about that, you can start to think about the kind of universe that God needs to create in order to provide opportunities where a genuine divine human friendship can actually take place. So again, God's most central purpose, at least what I'm claiming, God's most central purpose for creating the universe is to enter into friendship with as many humans as possible. And so if God's going to satisfy that goal, he needs to create a particular kind of universe. It needs to be a universe where self-conscious life is not only possible, but inevitable. Because a universe where God created, it was like a universe where created persons can use their own God-given power to create lots of different communities based on love and responsibility, where they can actually freely perform actions to develop their own moral character. These are the sort of things I think need to be in place. That significantly narrows down the range of universes that God might create, because only certain kinds of universes can contain that sort of thing. So what kind of universe can satisfy all of that? I don't know. I've got some ideas, and I'm going to share those with you, but I'm not certain about this stuff, okay? And I'm really clear about that in the book, too. I'm like, here's some stuff that I know for certain. I've got good arguments, and you can't tell me otherwise. And then there's some other stuff where I'm like, I don't know. But here's your options. I want you to understand why I don't know. Here's the arguments for and against. You're going to see all of that in the book. So let's get into this. So what kind of universe can satisfy all these things? My guess is lots of different kinds of universes can do that. But it's not going to be like, all that is going to be smaller than the whole range of all the possibilities that God could create. So I call this range of universes friendly universes, because they are universes where creatures can enter into a genuine friendship with God. So friendly universes, you got all the possible universes, subset friendly universes. Now, what kind of universe would God need to create in order for friendship with God to be merely possible? William Hasker says that we should expect God to create a particular kind of universe with stable laws of nature that allow for a variety of creatures with varying degrees of complexity, flexibility, and autonomy. So the complexity of creatures is going to range from like simple electrons, might seem kind of boring, to these really complex rational animals, which can also be very boring. You guys had dinner with some of these people earlier. Actually, I was at a good table, so I was happy. Now, the kind of autonomy in view here, though, that's a freedom where an entity, whatever this thing is, it can operate according to its own powers without God having to interfere it. So God's not constantly having to poke it, but do something cool. No, God's like, I gave you power, go on, do stuff. Now, this kind of natural universe is one that we would expect God to create in order to satisfy lots of different divine purposes, but in particular, that most central purpose. This is because this is the kind of natural universe needed in order to make it possible for created persons with significant freedom to merely exist. So a general feature of a friendly universe is stable laws of nature that allow for complexity and autonomy. Now, in order to achieve this, God will need to fully determine the initial conditions of the universe. And so this fully determinate set of initial conditions makes biological life possible. Tomorrow, you're going to hear a lot about the fine-tuning. I'm assuming you can't say we're going to skip that lecture tomorrow because the guy's right here. But tomorrow, we're all going to hear about fine-tuning. It's going to be wonderful. What you're going to hear is a lot of different things. Basically, there's lots of different ways the universe could go wrong right after the Big Bang. If it expands too fast, the universe collapses on itself. That's bad. You don't get biological life. If you get too many black holes, you're not going to get biological life. What this would mean is, if God doesn't fine-tune things just right, his entire plan gets screwed up and fails right from the start. God's not going to let that happen. And he's not an idiot, right? Like he's smart enough to go, okay, let's figure this out. So he's going to set good initial conditions where biological life in this universe is not merely possible but inevitable. That's what I want to say. However, there is a catch when you create a universe like this. There's always a catch, isn't there? It's always in the fine print. Here's the fine print. A universe with natural laws and created persons with freedom, that carries certain risks. So stable natural laws, that brings with the risk of natural disasters occurring. Creatures with significant moral freedom, now that brings the risk of them doing really bad, horrible things. Now, Emanuela Sani, she's a molecular biologist. I'm also married to her, so, you know. So we were looking at this sort of problem, and so what we came up with was we said, well, we should expect God to put in place certain risk management systems. And you can see all these different risk management systems in order to mitigate those risks. So since she was a molecular biologist, what she does is she lays out, here's all the fine-grained details of all in the molecular order of all the different risk management systems we see within our RNA and our DNA. And then I come up with these analogs much higher up the chain. So the claim that we want to make is a general feature of a friendly universe is that, yes, it's going to have certain risks involved, but God's not an idiot. He's going to put risk management systems in place. He knows that this is a risky universe, but I'm going to put stuff in there to make sure the risk is not just off-the-rails disaster. It's a providential God. Let me give you some examples, not from the molecular order, because I can't do that. Well, it would be a disaster. If Emma was here, she could do it. But let me give you some other examples, though, of risk management systems. So if one of God's goals is to create human persons who can enter into a genuine friendship with him, then he needs to ensure that humans have the right cognitive equipment that is primed for friendship. So I've already said that freedom is an essential part of that. There are other cognitive powers, mental powers, that are needed in order to make possible genuine relationships between God and humans. So a standard package of cognitive mechanisms will include things like the powers of rationality, emotion, empathy, and a theory of mind. Let me start with the theory of mind. So a theory of mind, that's just your ability to recognize that all these things around you, they have minds too. I'm not just staring at a room of robots. Like, I'm assuming you guys have like some sort of rich mental life. That's a theory of mind. I've got this ability to just kind of look at you and go, well, there's something going on there. Now, this is discussed a lot in the philosophy, religion literature, psychology literature. Alvin Plantinga, he extends this to this faculty that he calls this the sensus divinitatis, this sort of innate awareness that's built into you to just be aware of not just other minds, but a divine mind as well. So without this faculty, humans would be unable to be even aware of God. So you should expect a friendly universe to include humans who have a God-shaped hole in their hearts. You should expect to see a natural tendency in humans to think about spirituality and to develop religious traditions, which is something we see all over the world. We see humans developing these beliefs about God at incredibly young ages. Are their beliefs that good and accurate? That's another story for another day. But this is the sort of thing that I think you should expect to see in a friendly universe. But just recognizing other minds, even God, like that's not enough to ensure the success of God's most central purpose. Humans endowed with the ability to recognize other minds and perform free actions, that's not enough for accepting God's offer of friendship. In order to enter into a genuine friendship, creatures will need to have cognitive powers of rationality and emotion. These cognitive powers are said to enable people to share ideas, take responsibility for their actions, and develop trust and cooperation, all of which are very important for developing meaningful friendships. So rationality and emotion, these go hand in hand. I know normally we don't think that way. Normally we think emotions, rationalities are very, very much opposite. I want to say no. They're hand in hand. They go together. The power of rationality is the ability to be responsive to reasons for acting. You're appropriately responsive to reasons for acting. And there are a lot of different roles that reasons play in our free actions. They can justify your action. They can motivate you. They can explain why you did it, even though we go, I see why you did that. That was still really dumb. You shouldn't have done that. Reasons play a lot of different roles here. Now, oftentimes, your reasons for acting are because you see certain values or disvalues in the world. And that's your motivation for acting the way you do, which is where emotions come in. Because emotions help us identify reasons for acting, because emotions involve an evaluation. So here's what an emotion is. An emotion is a felt evaluation of a situation. So an emotion is a felt evaluation of a situation. When you are having an emotion, you are perceiving different values or disvalues in the world around you. And you feel that too. It's not just, it's cognitive, it's partly like cognitive, it's about something in the world, but it's also something you feel. So when you have an emotion, you are perceiving this object in front of you as being something that's worthy of your attention and worthy of acting on behalf of. So there's this very close connection between emotional evaluations and acting for a reason. Now, if an emotional response, if it really tracks the values very well in the world, like, it's a rational emotion. If it doesn't do it, then it's irrational. And that's the one you're more familiar with, probably, of like this person, their emotions are getting out of hand. They're not thinking rationally. What that means is they're seeing the situation very differently than you, and they're making, maybe it's a bad evaluation of the situation. But your emotions can also be very beautifully rational. So you hear like a beautiful song, and it just moves you to tears. My wife and I were in Glasgow, in Scotland, several years ago. This band I've been wanting to see forever finally plays, and I didn't realize they were going through this, one of my favorite albums, and they start playing the first song. I just start crying, and then I look around, I'm like, oh gosh, I look like an idiot. Everyone in the room's crying. They're like, I'm a teenager again, and they're all crying. I was like, that's right, because this is the most beautiful, fitting emotion in that situation. Whereas if someone's not crying, you're like, you don't have soul. Emotions can be rational or irrational. So God endowing humans with cognitive powers, that's a great example. At least I want to say it's a great example of a risk management system built into the psychology of human nature. God is the supreme object of value. By giving humans this cognitive power of reason and emotion, God has enabled humans to be capable of recognizing God's value and being appropriately responsive to God's value. That doesn't mean we're always going to get it right, but we have to have that ability to get it right there from the start. So what I think this does is this enables humans to accept God's offer of friendship. If humans lacked this cognitive power, they would not be able to accept God's offer of friendship, which would mean that God's purpose is just a failure from the start. So, talk about theory of mind, rationality, and emotion. I also want to say humans need the capacity for empathy to enter into a friendship with God. So the capacity for empathy is a person's ability to understand what it is like for another person to feel the way they do. So when you're empathizing with other people, what you're doing is you're coming to understand someone else's cares and concerns. You're coming to understand the reasons for why they're acting and feeling in the ways that they do. And empathy plays a very large role in the development of genuine relationships. I'll just give you two reasons for thinking this. So first, individuals who have a reduced capacity for empathy also have a reduced capacity to form attachments to others. So the higher the capacity for empathy, the higher the capacity to form attachments and genuine friendship. And then the second reason, humans, we naturally want to be understood because there's a kind of loneliness that comes when others cannot understand why you are feeling the way that you do. It's a very deep sort of loneliness there. And this is because humans, we do not bond with people who do not understand us, whereas we do bond with people who do empathetically understand us. And so the claim I want to make is that this natural human desire to just be understood, that can draw us to seek out the maximally empathetic God. This is the claim I want to make. So by endowing human persons with these cognitive powers, God has ensured that humans are primed for genuine relationship with God, primed to accept his offer of friendship. Not coerced, not forced, it's not guaranteed, but primed. That's all. I'm making a very minimal claim. Now earlier I mentioned there are certain risks in creating a natural world with free creatures. And so many philosophers argue that creating a universe like this, the one we find ourselves in, it's necessary in order for God's most central purpose to come about. So a common claim is that if God wants humans to be in a genuine relationship with him, well, humans, they have to have a particular kind of virtuous character. So think about the kind of friendships you have. Do you want to be friends with garbage people, or do you want to be friends with people who are kind of virtuous or trustworthy to some extent? Maybe you want to be friends with garbage people, I don't know. I've been in Philadelphia for too long, and I don't want that anymore. I want to be trustworthy people. And God's the same. He wants to be able to say to you, well done, good and faithful servant. Well done, I've entrusted you with much you will receive. So how is God going to get trustworthy people? So if God desires to have humans who are going to become trustworthy, the question becomes what kind of universe is required for humans to develop that sort of moral character. This brings us to the last 2 points I want to talk about tonight: epistemic distance and the possibility for suffering. So let me start with epistemic distance. It's a fancy way of talking. Basically just means there's some sort of item of knowledge that's not like super obvious. It's not immediately and overwhelmingly obvious. And so the case I'm interested in here is the existence and nature of God. What I want to say is God cannot make his own existence and presence overwhelmingly obvious. At least not all the time. You might be thinking, why? Well, if humans were immediately aware of the full presence of God, they would never freely develop their moral character. So think about this. Think about this for a second. So when I was 15, I went to this Christian youth convention, and for whatever reason that year, the speakers, they decided on a certain set of slogans they're just going to repeat ad nauseum over and over again. If some of you have worked in youth ministry, you've probably taken kids to these, and you're just like, okay, this is what we're doing this year? All right. Yeah. It's a good thing, though. I loved my time in youth ministry, but I was 15 at this point, so I wasn't a youth minister then. I'm 15. So that year, the slogan was, "Don't do anything that you would not do if Jesus Christ were in the room with you." Don't do anything that you would not do if Jesus Christ were in the room with you. Now, if I remember correctly, it was meant to make kids not look at pornography. I have no idea if that helped. My mind went immediately elsewhere. My first thought was, I'm not going to watch TV if Jesus walks in the room. That's just rude. I don't know why, but that was really I was just like, it's just really rude when a guest walks in watching TV. It's Jesus Christ, you really got to. And then I thought, gosh, I'm going to have to go to the bathroom at some point. I'm not. And then I'm 15, and so I'm like, okay, well, my wedding night, that's morally permissible to do certain things, and I'm not going to do that at you. This is a horrible So as a 15-year-old, I was like, no, this is a horrible moral principle. We cannot live by it. I'm 41, and I'm like, yeah, I was right. I got that one right. I'm definitely a philosopher in the making. I had no idea, but here we are. So, if human persons, if they're born with this immediate and innate awareness of the full presence of God, I just don't see how you're going to freely develop into the kind of virtuous beings that God wants us to be. So there needs to be some kind of epistemic distance between God and humans, where God's just not immediately and perpetually overwhelmingly obvious to us, at least not at this stage in our developments. So Brian Lethell, he tries to tease this out a little bit. He says that God cannot overwhelmingly bias our nature toward friendship. If my response to God is 95% implanted in me by God at the beginning, then I am 95% brainwashed by God. This is Lethell's claim. So God can implant in us, this sensus divinitatis, this God-shaped hole in our hearts, and he can provide all sorts of evidence of his nature and existence, and he can reveal himself in many ways through nature, through prophets, and ultimately through Christ. But God has to be careful to not coerce us into friendship with him. Can't do that from the start. Lefto claims God's going to have to find some sort of optimum balance where he doesn't overwhelm and coerce us. And Lefto says he's like, I don't know what that optimum balance is. And I don't either. I have no idea. But I'm assuming God's smart enough to figure it out. So Lefto says, he suggests it's probably a slight bias towards friendship with God, but not too much. A slight bias towards God leaves it as robustly possible that large numbers of people will reject God's offer of friendship. And so he says, because of what friendship is and God's position as our creator, if God seeks our friendship, we should expect him to endure a good deal of rejection, which is of course what we see. So, final thing. So one feature of a friendly universe is epistemic distance. And the final feature of a friendly universe I want to talk about is the possibility of suffering. Now, obviously there's an irony here, and what I'm saying, I'm talking about friendly universes, and I'm like, a friendly universe needs to involve some suffering. I know that. I know that there's some irony here. But remember, a friendly universe is just one where genuine friendship with God is possible. So as strange as it sounds, what I'm making the claim that a friendly universe has to include the possibility of suffering. And so you see this as a common claim from a lot of theologians and philosophers, is that God must place creatures in an environment where they can genuinely develop their moral character through a long, long series of significantly weighty moral choices. Have to be really deep and really heavy moral choices that you have to make at some point. And that involves an environment where the possibility of real harm, pain, and suffering is at play. So a famous example of this line of thought comes from John Hick. And so I've got this quote here. So Hick develops this thing called a soul-building theodicy. And so what Hick says is, God must create a universe with real consequences for human actions. Otherwise, humans cannot develop their moral character. And so he says, it's going to be a world in which there can be no pain. He says, a world in which there can be no pain or suffering would also be one in which there can be no moral choices and hence no possibility of moral growth and development. For in a situation in which no one can ever suffer injury or be liable to pain or suffering, there would be no distinction between right and wrong action. No action would be morally wrong because no action could have harmful consequences. And likewise, no action would be morally right in contrast to wrong. Whatever values such a world, it clearly could not serve a purpose of the development of its inhabitants from self-regarding animality to self-giving love. It's just a fancy English way of saying, you guys are selfish. And God knows that, and that's okay. But he wants you to stop being selfish. And it's going to take a long time to start thinking about other people and even start thinking about God. It's going to take a long process of development. That's part of the human condition. So this is what Hick is saying. So people like John Hick and Richard Swinburne, they argue that a universe with the possibility of real harm is required to bring about the great goods of soul-making and friendship with God. And so the possibility of suffering, it makes possible greater goods like genuine freedom, moral development, sympathy, compassion, and more. The actual development of human moral character to virtuous people is a prerequisite for a deep and abiding friendship with God. So as odd as it sounds, a general feature of a friendly universe is that it has to include the possibility of suffering. So I take these to be the general features of a friendly universe. I assume there's a lot of other features that are going to be in a friendly universe, things I've missed, things I've just not mentioned because we only have so much time tonight. But my hope is that I've given you enough where you can start thinking about this more deeply. And then maybe one day we can actually come up with a really exhaustive list together. So thank you.
Okay, we'll start with some questions. Anyone has any questions?
You take, yeah, because I'll lose the cue.
I'll start right there. Sure.
Oh, yeah, so you say that the immediate presence of Christ or God would inhibit, moral development. So what would you say about Christ who actually, walked the earth and was with the disciples at the time? Did they have moral development just because Christ was, immediately present to them?
This is something you will not see me discuss in the little book. This is something, the answer I'm about to give you is something I came up with when I was talking to a church last week. So let me try something new out. So friendship with God is going to have to be a bit different than friendship between you and I. So I just walk in this room and I see all of you guys here. And so I'm like, okay, your presence in one sense is overwhelmingly obvious. I can't deny your existence. But do I want to be friends with all of you? I can physically walk away. I can put a physical distance between some of you. Like, I'm like, I don't like you. So like, we're going, God's omnipresent. I can't do that. If God's like fully like immediately overwhelmingly obvious in that sort of way, I can't walk away from God. So I think there needs to be some kind of distance. Whereas when we look at the incarnation, there's a lot of epistemic distance there. So in one sense, like, you can't deny that there's this guy walking around, he performs some miracles, and you're like, what is that? And you see people questioning him constantly. You see this constantly throughout the Gospels. And Jesus isn't always like super clear. Sometimes he is, sometimes he's not. And I think part of this is that fine balance of, am I going to coerce these people or not? So I think what we have in the example of Christ is a kind of presence there that's undeniable, but a whole lot of other facts that are very important to know about Jesus that, is it overwhelmingly obvious? His own disciples didn't think, that he was the Messiah, like at first, or that he's the Messiah, but is he like really divine? And Jesus is like, yeah, I'm going to die on a cross. No, you're not going to die on a cross. Jesus, I don't think you understand what Messiah is supposed to do. You see this kind of stuff going on. And I'm like, right. He's not trying to make everything crystal clear right from the start. It needs to develop a bit more. Yeah. So it's a very good question.
On the very back of the blue folder.
I guess it kind of tails into that. I was wondering about, also, we're at an apologetics conference, so I might as well bring up atheists. You talked about rejection of friendship with God, but obviously, if you're an atheist, it's not that you're rejecting God, it's that you don't believe in its existence. So it wouldn't be a turning down of friendship there, would it? Or what? I mean, Help clarify this problem in my head.
Yeah. So if God's existence, if you're just like, I just reject the idea of God entirely, you're not even interested in friendship. And so what I've noticed, because I've spent most of my adult life in the UK and in Europe, and I could run arguments for the existence of God all day long. They're not going to listen. When I go on TikTok Lives, which is it's a dumpster fire, don't go on TikTok Lives. Some minister in Florida convinced me like I should start doing this, and so I've done it, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And what I keep seeing is exactly the phenomenon I'm about to describe. You give arguments, and they're like, yeah, but well, where's the evidence? And you're like, it's the argument I just gave. So there's just no evidence. So what I do instead is I'm like, well, look, I'm an expert on models of God and thinking about different things. And they're like, oh, like stuff other than the Christian God? I'm like, sure, if that's what you need to hear, fine. And I start describing, there's all these different theories of God. We start debating the very idea of God. And all of a sudden, everyone's got opinions that are really serious opinions. They want to know exactly what's going on. They want to think through it. They're starting to entertain the idea of God in a very different way that I'm not used to seeing, typically. So what I think is going on here is something like this. When I first started working on God and emotion, I was, at that point, I was like, screw this entire project of theology. I hate all of these people. These are awful people. I don't want to be a part of this. And I had some atheist friends go, you've got to tell these people that they are wrong. Like, God has to tell all these people who deny that God has to say God doesn't have anything. You got to tell them you're wrong. You got to do this wrong. You got to stick it in. And I was like, why do you care? Why? And the thing is, I think deep down, everyone does care. Because we look at this universe and we're like, we are, like, it feels so lonely on the pale blue dot in this vast empty universe. We don't want that to be true. And I think most people, when I'm talking to them about their denial of God or something like that, there's something like that going on in the background. So getting into this area, the idea of friendship with God, it sparks something different. So I do think there's something there going on. I do think that God-shaped hole is there. Just figuring out the right ways to talk to people, to get them really thinking about that is hard, though. Yeah.
Matthew?
Yeah. On the possibility of suffering thing, is that given our fallen state that needs to be, or is it even? Because what about Adam and Eve? Like, did they need to have that possibility of suffering? Is that just the free choice, or is it given our fallen state, given our nature, our need for moral improvement? Do we need that possibility of suffering?
There's a few different ways you can go with this. So Swinburne and Hick, they're saying it's got to be there from the start, full stop. But keep in mind, this is just a mere possibility. So even if you want to go real literal, as literal as you could possibly go with the Adam and Eve story, you'd still be saying, well, it's definitely possible. Because if they make one wrong action, we fall. So either way, yeah, this is just a mere possibility. It's built in from the start, I think. Yeah.
Is this like significant moral improvement then?
Yes, if you're wanting to go that route, which I do, but yeah. I know some people are like trying to project their way and stuff. So.
Go ahead, Dr. Barnes, and then I'll go up there, and then I'll go back down.
Okay.
Oh, you just mentioned this point, so
Yeah.
one objection, the universe is really big.
Mhm.
Right, God made all of this just so we can live in.
Right.
Like there's a lot of galaxies I'm told.
Right. That's just like empty.
Yeah, well,
Well, not necessarily empty, but like.
I like it, but I mean, there might be no one there, what's going on?
Right. So that's why I said it's not the only reason why God would create the universe. It's one of God's most central purpose. One of the things I want to explore in this Models of God and Problems of Creation book is trying to like dig into this a bit deeper. So there's this medieval discussion on this. So within Jewish philosophy, it was really common to be like, the only reason God created this universe is for the Messiah. Or, no, it was just for the Jewish people. Like, this is the main two options. And then Maimonides goes, so like, what about all this grass? And like, what about these cows eating the grass? Like, you really need all of that to just get a Messiah? Like, no. And so the claim is, when you're looking at the general problem of creation, there's this thing called the great chain of being. Got to the top, and there's all these possible things that it could create, lesser down the chain. And so the claim is, each one of those things is valuable enough, and so that's a reason for God to create it. But God could have lots of reasons for wanting to bring about a particular kind of universe. One reason would be like, how many things can I get on the chain, the great chain? And so it might be like, let's get an evolutionary universe up and running. I can start from the bottom and get a whole bunch of stuff. But one of my ultimate goals, though, one of my most central goals is humans. So it might be the case that vast universe, because that's just cool, a universe with lots of galaxies where, sure, there's no like conscious life going on there, but like, that's cool. And then I also want this too. Like, these are possibilities, but I don't know how it all fits together exactly.
You mentioned empathy needing empathy to be able to accept the friendship of God. what work is being done that you're aware of in spaces where neurodiversity is a prime topic, where empathy is something that is more mirrored rather than experienced?
Yes. So I didn't get into this at all. You won't see me get into this too much in this book. In my book, God in Emotion, I talk about it a little bit more. So empathy's got three components. It's got this cognitive component that I'm aware that you have a particular emotion. Then it has this affective component where it's like, I really understand what it feels like to have this particular emotion. And then the third condition is something about my interaction with you is the basis for me to be able to figure out this is what it's like to be you. And so yeah, with certain kinds of neurodivergency, like you'll have a deficit in one of those first two conditions. But it's not a complete utter absence usually, so it's still there. So autism is like one case where it'll be like, you've got like a deficit in the recognition part of going like that these people have this emotion, but the affective part's still there quite high. Whereas with psychopaths, not in like the fun sense I had last year for the comedy show, but like actual like psychological literature, it's the other way around. But again, they still have it. It's a deficit compared to the normal population, but it's still there. But I've not seen enough people really develop it as it applies to religion yet. But because I mentioned the psychopath stuff in a few papers, some people decided to go ahead and do that. So Anastasia Scrutton at Leeds, she's working on a whole big major project on mental health and theology. And so she's trying to run with that. She has a book already out called Depression and Christianity. So that was her first book to develop these things. But she wanted to do the psychopath stuff more because it's just like, you just made it sound so much fun. Let's go for it. Jose Porcho, is that his last name? Oh gosh. He's a Brazilian philosopher, and he got some grant money from the Brazilian government just to look at psychopathy and religion as well. He hasn't published anything from that yet, but he's working on it. So I know that they got excited about it, and so they're doing it, which is cool because I wanted to finish some other projects, so I was like, I can't do anything wrong. So yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was going to ask about the empathy and sociopaths and psychopaths.
Okay.
So, you kind of went over this in our couple questions back, but do you think, so you mentioned atheists or people who don't believe in God that because they aren't interested, but do you think it's possible for rational disbelief to exist?
Yeah, I really do. I don't talk about it in this particular book. One of the future books I'm working on, I've mentioned it a bit. But yeah, I really do think there's that idea of like non-culpable like disbelief. I think that's a real possibility. And in fact, like some of my friends, my friend like Natalia Ding, she's like doing really brilliant work on philosophy of time. And so like we've worked on like some projects together, and I've worked with her at a couple different universities over the years. And I remember asking her one time, I was like, you're an atheist, like there's problem of evil stuff. She's just like, no, I don't think there's really that big of a problem from evil against God. I just don't think there's enough evidence. That's it. But she's really fascinated by the ideas. She's very fascinated about spirituality, all these kind of things. It's just like, there's not enough evidence. And she knows the evidence inside and out. I mean, like she really, like, very well. Like it's not like, like somebody on YouTube or like they know the evidence. I'm like, yeah, sure, you watched some videos at some point. Like she actually like did a whole big project on fine tuning at Cambridge for like 3 years and stuff. So yeah, so I think this is a real possibility. I do. And in some cases, when I look at the world and they do look at some of the sort of suffering or the upbringing that people had, I'm amazed. So like this would be an example from the UK. When I look at like the religious education system, you're forced to do this religious education throughout like, high school and stuff. And the answers to any question was just pray harder. And I'm like, okay, it could be any deep intellectual question. Just pray more. Shut up. Go in that closet over there and pray more. And then seeing some people come out of that and they were still Christian, that amazed me. I was like, I don't know how you are still believing in any of this after that. So like, I actually was like, do you have an irrational faith? And I'm like, no, I don't want that to be the case. But yeah, I can really think there was good reasons because you seeing the unreasonableness of people around you professing this. So I think these are real possibilities. Yeah.
How do you cope with that? Sorry.
How do I cope with that? I have no idea. I don't know. Anxiety, pray. I don't know. Some Ben and Jerry's, ice cream every once in a while. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Thank you. Dolores.
So, quick thing. the Grand Inquisitor, the chapter of Brother Sharamazov,
Mhm.
this incredible look at this balance between, like, I mean, he just basically yells at Jesus the whole time. Why didn't you just coerce us? We're not strong enough for this, right? And I have the same thing where my students who don't even believe in God are on the side of Jesus every time. And every Sutia teacher, I try more and more to bolster the Grand Inquisitor's point. And they're Team Jesus every time. Because this idea of being bullied into friend, like, you should have just seized our friendship from us, right? Because we're not strong enough to give you. But I do have a question about if friendship with God requires these things, what is friendship with God in heaven going to look like?
I don't know.
As far as like, yeah, no, I don't either. That's why I'm looking at the idea, right? Like as far as the potential for suffering, right? And epistemic distance, we don't tend to think that we're going to find these things in heaven.
Right. Exactly.
But we do expect friendship with God in heaven. So
Yeah, so here's the tentative thoughts that I've got on this. So when I'm thinking of all this stuff for a friendly universe, like this is stage one of God's plan.
yeah,
And I'm like, I don't like it. I didn't have a choice about it. None of us have a choice about whether or not to exist. Not even God has a choice about whether or not to exist. So I'm like, okay, great. We're just kind of like, here we are. And God's like, you got to be a part of this project. I'll make it up to you, I promise. So I'm like, okay. I'm really having to trust you a lot here. And that's something I want to explore more of, going like, what exactly is the side of like God's got to earn our trust too? Because I think that's a big part of the story that we don't talk about in the Gospels. That's in the Gospels, but we don't talk about it enough. What I see as at this stage one of human development, you need these features in the world. At some point, those will go away. So like having the immediate presence of God right after the start is going to be terrible. So when you look at the prophet Isaiah, when he first encounters God, like, I don't know if you guys remember what Isaiah says, but he's basically like, oh my gosh, I'm in the presence of a holy God. This is horrible. This is awful. I'm a sinner. And it's like, chill out. At some point, you get used to it, and it's okay. Actually, this is kind of nice. Oh my goodness, this is the best thing in the world. So it's something that we're building up to, we're ramping up to. And so a lot of these other conditions, they're no longer necessary. I hate the idea of saying they're training wheels that you get rid of, because like epistemic distance and like horrible suffering, those are training wheels. That makes it sound like too... I'm often like, too glib and lighthearted with these things, but even that feels a bit too far for me at the moment. But yeah, I do kind of see that as like, this is stage one. Later on, they're not going to be necessary because we will have developed. But when that happens, I don't understand.
Thank you. Jeremy?
As far as natural evils, you sort of appeal to the idea that there are initial conditions, and from that, these great goods evolve, but it sort of comes with these natural evils. Do you think that it would be possible for God to sort of behind the scenes constantly change nature in such a way that it appeared to be the natural laws to us, because there aren't these noticeable interventions like miracles? It's just the constant work of God creates a natural world in which there isn't so much suffering. And if that's possible, what would God's motivation be for having more of a hands-off approach to nature? Would it be that there might be something wrong with misleading us, that we think that's natural when it really isn't? Or is it that it would deprive us of these great providential goods to kind of, conquer the evils in nature? I'm just wondering if you think that it's possible for God to have just made the world very regular.
Yeah.
But acting on it constantly in a way that nature couldn't do by itself.
Oh, I see. So this is something I do go into the book quite a bit later on. It's in the chapters on providence, and that's the one where I start off going, I don't know, and I'm going to explain to you why I don't know which one's the right one. So what you get is this view called occasionalism. So there's this view that is called universal divine causality. God directly and immediately causes every single thing that happens. Anything that has any sort of existence, God directly causes it. So why are you sitting here right now? Because God directly caused it. Why are you thinking whatever thoughts you're thinking right now? Are you feeling whatever feelings you're feeling? Because God directly caused it. And this is a very popular view at different points throughout history. And I'm like, okay, how do I have any causal power in this story? Someone who affirms occasionalism says, you don't. God's the only person that has any causal power. That's it. And you're like, cool. So all those horrible things that have happened is just God directly doing it. How is God not the author of evil? And you're like, well, I guess he is, okay. There's this other view that goes, the view that I affirm, where it's like, God's like, no, I'm just going to create things that have causal powers. I just keep them up and running, that's it. So it's like a mere conservation. He can intervene if he wants to, perform some miracles here or there, answer some prayers. but for the most part, it's like just conserving existence. Apparently, this is deism. And I was like, so he answers prayers, he performs miracles, he raises, but this is okay, cool. I don't think you know what deism is. Still okay. But that's the objection. There's this in-between view where God directly causes everything to happen, but you totally have power, trust me, dude. And that's like a very, very popular view throughout the Middle Ages in Christianity. God concurs with your action, which means you could like cause stuff to happen, but it's not going to do anything, so God has to cause you to cause it, and then he has to like cause your action to be efficacious. And I'm like, did you really give me power? Like, yeah, you gave me power. You just can't do anything with it unless God causes you. And then he causes it, and I'm like, oh gosh. So yeah, you've got these views, and what I try to do is tease out like, this is a disaster. Another way we could go. This isn't in the book. This isn't a debate I had with my friend Sam Hiddenness. So Sam wants to develop this. I think this thing died. Oh well. So Sam wants to develop this thing called Hasidic idealism. So it's not your normal like Barclayan like Irish idealism. Like this is like a mystical Jewish idealism, and you get to like say Yiddish phrases and stuff. So it's fun. And the idea is there's just God and his ideas, and so we are God's imaginary friends. That's the title of one of his papers, God's imaginary friends. It's the end of the paper. So the world, it looks like all this physical stuff is happening in the world. Physics just goes the same way that it does, but really it's just God and his own ideas. And Sam's like, what's the problem with this? And I'm like, well, here's the problem. First off, it's not a real creation, because God necessarily has his ideas. So he didn't create anything, and you said creation is really important for Jewish thought. He's like, it is. I'm like, well, okay, then not a creation. Second problem, all of God's thoughts are like just these different universes. And so all the possibilities are like actual, like real things that are happening. Think about all the logical possibilities. There's some really horrible logical possibilities. All of those are all fully real. And so you get this explosion of like horrendous awfulness that's just necessarily there in the world. And so like this is a very ugly view. And Sam's like, let me get back to it.
I have time for one more question. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe. Yep.
Okay, fine. Sorry. I have a question about the word friendship itself.
Okay.
Right? Like when I imagine a, friendship between people, it's a friendship of, trustworthiness, of, having empathy for the other person, but also a friendship of, equality, right? Both in authority and in what they can give, right? God is, everything to give to us, and we really just have stuff to take away from God. So is it, do we have the same type of friendship that we would with, our peers? Or is it like a, different type of friendship? Because obviously we don't have the same authority as God.
Right.
Obviously we don't have the same, we're not equal to God.
Yeah.
So how does that?
This is one where I don't know yet, because it's one I saw from the start, and it's when I was first writing this book, and it's one I was like, I don't have time to do the research yet on it. But yeah, it's this problem that goes back to Aristotle, like friendship can only obtain between equals, and like, I feel like I've got friends I'm definitely not equals with. I've got some people who are like, I don't want to say they're garbage people because I want to be polite right now, but I'm thinking it. And I've got friends who are like, I'm like, how am I friends with this person? Like, this is crazy. Like, and so I feel like I just want to reject this Aristotelian assumption of equality. And I know Aquinas tries to do the same thing, but working out the details, I don't know yet. But it's the right question to ask. I just don't know.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for attending. Ryan does have his book, Eternal Love, for sale, and just before this presentation, he signed a copy. So this will be a great opportunity to get one of those. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Ryan. We appreciate you, Dr. Holman.